Imagine this. You have a tenant named Miss Smith. Miss Smith warms your heart every time you see her. She sits out front of her home each day, enjoying the weather and what time she has left on this earth. She appreciates you. The biggest smile comes across her face every time she sees you, infecting everyone around her with her warmth. She pays on time, she follows the rules, she maintains her home and yard, and she wishes to spend the rest of her life in your community. I think we can all agree that one of the biggest appeals to mobile home parks is the low tenant turnover. Vacancy loss can crush a pro forma. So, in theory, stickier tenants mean higher performing assets. But if you haven't already figured out where I'm going with this, let me be a little bit more blunt. What's the opposite of Miss Smith? Let's call him Mr. Meaner. Mr. Meaner scowls every time he sees you, doesn't maintain his yard, pays sporadically and inconsistently, constantly complains, invites only God knows who over at all hours of the day to do only God knows what. And he owns his home, so he isn't going anywhere. People don't talk enough about how much of a marriage a tenant-landlord relationship is. Lower turnover creates higher stakes to select the right tenant. And thus, the screening process proves much more difficult. Intuitively, the elevated difficulty makes sense. We deal with affordable housing, so we don't often have high income, high credit, no criminal history, no vicious animals prospects applying. So we face a really tough challenge. We deal mostly with riskier prospects, but at the same time, we want those prospects to be sticky, long-term tenants. Let me reiterate that. We must select a long-term, sticky tenant from a list of high-risk prospects. Tenant screening is a skill, and for our space, a crucial one at that. So for this next episode on my skills series, we will cover tenant screening basics so you can develop this skill and find more Miss Smiths.
Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
How do we find more Miss Smiths and screen out Mr. Meaners? Chapter 1, Fair Housing Laws. Before we even think to begin talking screenings, please go to www.hud.gov. Read the laws, understand the laws, teach your employees the laws. You can't tell someone they can't apply even if you know they'll never get approved and that they'll just waste their money on an app fee. You can't post advertisements saying things like no children or no wheelchairs. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, you can't tell people with service dogs that they aren't welcome. There's a reason why I'm starting with this. It doesn't matter if you want to be an ethical operator or not, you need to understand fair housing laws, at a minimum, to avoid scammers. Similar to ambulance chasing attorneys, some folks understand the fair housing laws and deliberately try to trap you or your employees saying or doing something that violates these laws. The game they play involves catching you in the act, threatening a lawsuit, and then ideally settling for cash outside of court. Even if you win in court, that'll come at a price. both financial and emotional. Attorneys cost a lot, and the mental trauma of rumination will wear you down. So, abide by the law, if nothing else, to avoid scammers. Chapter 2. Felonies. The last thing in the world you want is crime. Imagine a beautiful glass of your favorite beverage, only to see a piece of dirt floating in the liquid. The dirt ruins the entire drink. Similarly, a misdemeanor can ruin an entire property. And worse, criminals behave like magnets, attracting other troublemakers and repelling your good tenants. We have kicked out plenty of criminals, druggies, and sketchy people over the years, and the angry phone calls and issues magically disappear when certain individuals leave. The easiest way to deal with this is to require every adult to complete a full criminal background and credit check. Let them know you are doing this up front, and you'll screen out a lot of potential troublemakers without wasting much time. But smarter troublemakers might know it's coming, so always start a conversation by asking, how many adults will be living here? Usually, they'll cough up that other adults will be living there, at which point in time, you can hit them with the criminal background check for all adults piece. So, what felonies should you screen for? We have accepted plenty of felons over the years. A lot of times, good people just wind up in the wrong place at the wrong time. We once had a guy have a cocaine trafficking charge from Miami back in the 80s, peak Cocaine Cowboys era. We had him jump a few hurdles, proving he was in fact just unlucky. Turns out, several confirmed he was just getting a ride from his cousin, who happened to have a trunk full of cocaine. Talk about the wrong place at the wrong time. The prospect never had any criminal history after that, and he wound up being one of our favorite tenants. So, felonies are tricky. Sometimes it'll be obvious. Sometimes you have to do some digging. A lot of people can change. Most are doomed to repeat trouble behaviors. You can learn a lot from parole officers and references. In short, be firm, but open. Lots of good people make mistakes, but lots of bad people may pose serious threats to you and your neighborhood, and sometimes all it takes is one bad person to ruin an entire community. One quick story before we move on. We once had an RV tenant with some misdemeanors and poor credit apply. We denied her, but she had her father co-sign. He was spectacular. So, I took a chance on her. Well, about as soon as she moved in, out of nowhere, what amounted to meth parties began. One neighbor even reported a guy urinating off of his roof. You know how we got that tenant out, and in short order? We threatened to evict her father, which is what happens to a cosigner and what he knowingly signed up for. Drugs cloud people's minds, so eviction notices meant nothing to this woman. But the soft spot she had for her father made the difference in getting her out. Always CYA. And sometimes the risks you take won't pan out. So do your best to minimize the damage with contingencies. Chapter 3. Bankruptcies and credit issues. I can count on one hand the number of times I've run into bankruptcies on people's records. It's an automatic no. But we accept people with poor credit all the time. I like to explain it like this. If you bought a pair of shoes from Kohl's on credit and didn't pay them off, I don't care. If you didn't pay your rent, utility, or car payment, then I care. Look, we deal with affordable housing. People live in these communities frequently out of necessity. Normal people get divorced, hurt on the job, laid off, have a lot of children, or simply are down on their luck. Therefore, we expect people with less than ideal credit. The key is, what do they pay? If you've got 10 bills to pay each month and you can only afford 3, they most likely will be food, water, and shelter. If someone is taking a beating on their credit in other areas, but pay you, the landlord, it's hard to care about a low credit score. And quite frankly, that happens a lot without you ever knowing about it. We once had a resident tell us her car was repoed. To my knowledge, I don't think she paid late on her rent once. So what type of credit do we not care about? Student loans, medical debt, and various other menial things. Both student loan debt and medical debt are atrocious in this country. Even bankruptcies don't excuse you from student loan debt. So as long as you are paying your rent and other essentials, we largely look the other way. Speaking of essentials, those are big red flags. Sure, you may have paid for your food, water, and shelter, but who lets their power go out? That's a big deal. The same goes, in my opinion, with about every other utility, including phones. Debt to income is also another big piece. While we may look the other way on student loans and medical debt, that doesn't mean we completely ignore it, especially if it's paired with a ton of other debt. But what about no credit? No credit is tricky. Lots of people just never got a bank account or established credit. In general, the older you are, the better a sign no credit is. Think about it. If you got in trouble with money, regardless of whether or not you have credit or a bank account, a debtor will find you and put the derogatory event on your credit. So someone who managed to survive for years, if not decades, without any credit, in my opinion, is a safer bet than someone with poor credit. That being said, it may be a good idea to collect some rent up front just in case. Age plays into it. A 19-year-old with no credit is way different than a 49-year-old with no credit. The same applies to everything else in terms of age. A 19-year-old with no criminal history tells you less than a 49-year-old with no criminal history. Bad habits usually develop and materialize in someone's 20s. Also, while people do change, most don't. So generally speaking, older means easier times predicting patterns of behavior. Chapter 4. Evictions. While there is a big difference between an eviction filing and an eviction judgment, both are bad. A judgment simply means the landlord won in court and the tenant was formally evicted. A filing, but dismissal, can mean about anything from a mistake to a peacefully negotiated exit. Generally speaking, a judgment within, say, 5 years is an automatic no for me. That being said, a lot of times there is a serious gray area. One of my best tenants had an eviction on his record from within 2 years in the past. He looked at me funny when I mentioned it. It turns out they moved out of an apartment complex right as a property management change occurred, and with no communication between the old and new employee, a peaceful exit then turned into an unexpected eviction filing, and then the no-show in court ended up in a judgment on his record. Sometimes all you need to do is call the apartment complex to uncover errors. You'd be surprised how frequently that does happen. So with a few extra hurdles, sometimes you can even overcome a recent eviction. Multiple evictions or multiple eviction filings, especially from different landlords, is a big no-no. Sure, you may have been unlucky that one time. But again, people are creatures of habit. Chapter 5. Pets. Imagine this. You have a wonderful prospect with a great credit score, high-paying job, clean criminal history, and no evictions, bankruptcies, or any other red flags. But they have vicious dogs. Searching for the right tenant can feel like searching for a unicorn. Pets are like children. I know I view my dog like a child. You've got to be strict about this and let people know upfront your rules, otherwise people will sneak in animals. Then it is an absolute nightmare trying to pry a beloved pet away from a family. Trust me, you will always look like and feel like the bad guy in those situations. The best thing to do is, again, let people know the rules as they are applying. Remember to be careful with phrasing, as fair housing laws can come into play, especially with service animals. Chapter 6. Income and length of employment. Generally speaking, the higher the income, the better. But sometimes higher-paying jobs are seasonal or volatile. Waffle House can be low-paying, but one of the most stable jobs out there. About the only things keeping a Waffle House closed are hurricanes and pandemics. Construction, on the other hand, can be high-paying, but completely unpredictable. You should always push for pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements, or anything beyond a written note from a boss to prove that income is stable and real. Anyone can say they make $40,000 per year, but you should put the onus on them to actually prove it. Length of employment is another big indicator. Sure, you may be able to prove $60K per year, but if you're only a couple of weeks in, that's not very reassuring. Generally speaking, we require at least 3 times the gross income relative to the rent. So if the unit goes for $500 per month, they'll need to prove $1,500. If you lean towards the tenant-owned home model, you need to be extra careful with this. We have had plenty of people let their homes go into utter disrepair because they'd rather pay their lot rent than fix a roof or toilet. We once paid for a woman's sewer line fix and had her pay us back interest-free over several months. Sure, it can be fine to work with some folks occasionally, but that needs to be an exception, not a rule. The best way to prevent putting someone in a financially difficult spot where you may have to step in and help is to just screen the low income up front. Chapter 7. Rental history. You can't trust current or most recent former landlords. Generally speaking, they won't tell you the truth as they want a bad tenant out of their hair. If you check 2 landlords ago, you can get some reality. We have called and found out a little dog was actually a big dog. We have found out a temporary late paying period was actually the norm, but they always paid their late fee. Sure, someone may never have been evicted before, but if they have been living with a relative for the last 10 years, that data point becomes irrelevant. How long did your prospect stay put? Did they move once every 2 years? Did they stay put in one place for 10 years? If you dig the tenant-owned home model, you want someone more sticky, but that being said, a lot of times people move around a lot while younger only to settle when they get married or have children. While relevant, rental history is a good data point, but not a key driver. Chapter 8. Trust your gut. If something doesn't feel right, keep digging. Yes, we should all err on rationality over emotion, but intuition has saved us before. We once had someone apply only to realize their cash was from a risky line of credit. Once we exposed that fact, all sorts of other bad things came flying out. We have had countless people fess up that others will be moving in with them. We have had co-signers not being told the truth by the co-applicant. We have taken a chance on people that felt overly optimistic, only to realize several months in that we were right, and they got in over their heads. One of the most brutal parts of this business, in my opinion, is denying a prospect. Unlike getting a cold shoulder at a bar while trying to flirt with someone you find attractive, a denial is a rejection of someone on a deeply personal level. Think about it. The prospect gives you intimate details about their life, only to realize they don't even qualify to live in a mobile home park. Brutal. So be mindful of people's feelings. But at the same time, you do have a business to run. And I'm guessing you, like me, are a for-profit venture, not a non-for-profit or charity. Imagine going on a date with someone, but by the end of the date, you must decide either to marry the person or never see them again. Sure, you can have a look at their bank account, job history, and speak with their employer and some references. Sounds like a reality TV show, doesn't it? But tenant screening is basically the same thing. Some people charm you big time on the first date, only to let you down a few months later. Some make you scratch your head, asking yourself why you even bothered to show up. But eventually you warm up a bit and take a chance, and several months later, you thank yourself for doing just that. Screening can really feel like a crapshoot. You don't know what you'll get, even with proper due diligence and documentation. I should have tracked this, so I don't have an exact number, but I feel like I looked at close to 100 applications before I truly felt comfortable making a decision and feeling confident about it. Even after years and hundreds of prospects, I'm still wrong more frequently than I'd like to admit. Even when I'm right, I can still be wrong. Someone can get hurt on the job, pass away, or something completely out of your control can derail an otherwise great tenant. Sometimes miss can even turn into misdemeanors. One of my main goals with this podcast is to help good people like you better understand the risks you take when purchasing a mobile home park. Although you may feel a bit more confident about screening tenants after listening to this episode, I hope you also take time to reflect on the risk you inherit with a heavier lease-up opportunity. You must realize you might find 9 miss, but invite just 1 misdemeanor into your property, and in short order, you may find that ratio changing quickly and in the wrong direction. Take your time. Do your due diligence. Develop this skill. Understand the risks, but yet take some chances on potentially good people facing a tough time. Best of luck. Entrepreneurs make mistakes, but with the overwhelming amount of free information out there, you don't have to be doomed to making those same mistakes. You just have to find a consolidated version of the most important information. What if I told you I'll gift you all of my DD mistakes I've made over the years for free? Just leave me a 5-star review, screenshot the review after it goes live, and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, join our Facebook group, Mobile Home Park Mastermind. You'll find hundreds of other mobile home park owners sharing ideas, contractors, and deals. It's free to join, and we would absolutely love having you join us.